Celestial greetings. I'm Janet Booth, a professional astrologer from West Hartford, Connecticut, and welcome to my program on astrology called Looking Up. And this is the part where I usually have my glasses off and look up, but I left my glasses on today. That's okay. This episode is one that can apply to any time frame rather than just looking at something in the year of 2018. And I am filming it in July of 2018, and it will be first shown on West Hartford Community Television in September 2018. The episode is entitled Many Happy Returns. And first, before I talk about astrology for a second, I'm going to start off talking about tarot for just a moment, because I first studied tarot shortly before I first studied astrology back in 1976, but I kind of studied both of them together. And 5 years after I started studying, two women, Karen Vogel and Vicki Noble, created a new deck kind of oriented towards women with matriarchal imagery, and it's called the Mother Peace Tarot deck, and also known as the Round deck. And first I want to show you the back side of what those cards look like, because it's so wonderful. It's a circle of circles, and within each circle are more circles. So it kind of reminds me of how cycles are within cycles are within cycles. And that's really kind of what makes astrology go around. So my favorite card, or one of my favorite cards in the Mother Peace deck, is the Wheel of Fortune card. And that one shows a zodiac around the outer edge. And that gives us the idea that actually the zodiac is sort of like a reference point in the distance of our planetary measurement. And the planets are all aligned in the middle of that card. And when I see that card come up in a reading, I always think it means, and I interpret it as, the developments that the card reading is looking at are going to happen in accordance with the planetary cycles and in their own time, and when it's cosmic and not just, when we're trying to force the issue. So that usually gets me running to a person's chart, and I always like to kind of combine and cross-fertilize between astrology and tarot. So usually a tarot reading has me look at astrology, and astrology reading sometimes prompts me to go look at the tarot, because astrology is great on timing, and tarot is really great on just how things are going to play out. What's the story going to evolve like? So in this talk today, we're going to be seeing how each of the planets has a cycle. And obviously we know that they each revolve around the sun. And this is a lovely placemat that I got along my travels somewhere. And it shows things of the sort of lineup of the planets from Sun to Mercury to Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. They ran out of room. They didn't put Pluto on here. This was a placemat from before Pluto was downgraded to a dwarf planet. But that's just astronomers that think that way. Astrologers, they still count Pluto as a planet. So the planets do go around the sun, and we go around the sun on the third rock from the sun. So we see a very even apparent motion of the sun around us, around the zodiac, which is really just a reflection of our motion around the sun. And that, of course, is a 1-year cycle. That's the definition of a year. And the moon is going directly around us. So we also see even circles with that motion, and that's what defines a month, about 29 days. The other planets are going in their orbit, but we don't see the speed necessarily, especially on the quick planets. So in other words, Mercury goes around the sun in basically 88 days. But we don't see Mercury coming back to its place in the chart in the sense of what is called a return in 88 days, because we're moving too. And when we're in motion and another planet is in motion, we have that phenomenon that's called retrograde. And all the planets do it except the sun and the moon, and it's where they appear to come to a stop when measured against the backdrop of the zodiac. Then they go in the opposite direction of their normal motion for a period of time. They appear to stop again. Then they get going in what would be their forward motion, and eventually get out of that area that they zigzagged, that range of degrees in the zodiac. So when we look at these planetary cycles, what I'm most concerned about today is how we view it from the Earth and what we call returns. And you know, there's that great phrase that you hear a lot at birthdays, many happy returns, hence the name of the show today. Or many happy returns of the day. And it's a phrase that came up, I don't know, maybe the 1700s, the 1800s, and applied to birthdays as well as holidays. And it kind of meant, gee, if you're having a good Christmas, we hope Christmas comes around again, it'll be another Christmas just as good as this, a happy return of the day. But when I hear that phrase now, many happy returns, I think of happy planetary returns. And it's not just the return of the sun, but that's the most obvious one, and we'll tackle that one first. So because we have a man-made calendar with what we call leap year, every fourth year we stick one extra day into that calendar, and it shifts slightly how the zodiac positioning of the sun aligns with our calendar. So your return of the sun to the exact position where it was when you were born, called your solar return, will happen near your birthday, but it's not always on the anniversary of your birth. Some days, some years, it's the calendar day before your birthday, and some years it's the calendar day after your birthday. Most years it is on your birthday. It's not at the same time you were born. It's going to be when the sun comes back to that fraction of a zodiac degree that it occupied at your birth. So when it's a different time of day, you're going to have different sign that's coming up over the eastern horizon than you do in your natal birth chart. And all of the houses and the signs that align with them are going to be different from your birth chart. Now, every so often you have a birthday chart that does have the same sign rising as your birth when you were born. So those years, I think, are ones when we have a little bit more of a resonance to our true self, or that the main proclivities of the sign energies that go with those different departments of our life that are from those 12 houses that are how we split the sky according to the 4 directions, those are going to be a little truer to what we see across the course of our lifetime in that year that has a repeating rising sign at birth, at the birthday. Okay, so there are disagreements, or let's just say different opinions of astrologers as to what way to calculate a solar return chart. So some people say it's got to be where you were born. We place the chart there. And some people say, oh, if you've moved from where you were born, which many people have, we should place the chart at where you live now. And then still astrologers, other astrologers say, no, we should have it for where you are at the minute that that return occurs. And those people of that school of thought will oftentimes send their clients off to all kinds of places to try to change how those signs line up with the departments of the life and where the planets end up in what departments. It's going to be the same moment in time that the sun comes back to its fraction of the degree where it was when you were born, but when we're moving multiple time zones, you can have a whole different, house or sign for the different positions. So astrologers might look and say, oh, we've got these bad T-square lineup of the planets, and that's going to be in the part that, has to do with your health or your money or your career, and let's just move it so it might affect, your friends or your, something else, your house instead of your body. Sometimes you'd rather pick where you think you're going to have your problems, or you say, oh, here's the Grand Trine pattern, and we want to make sure we have that pointing to the top so it gets your career and things, line up better. And so you'll hear some wonderful stories about how great somebody's life turned out because they traveled to someplace else recommended by their astrologer for their solar return birthday chart. And I'm of a mixed opinion about it. I've seen that help. I've seen it make no difference whatsoever. I remember going to a lecture once that was talking about FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And they said he was in Europe for some, I don't know, summit or something when his birthday came around. And if you took and did his birthday chart where he was in Europe, that described a lot of what was going on for him in a public way and in his sort of work and career. But if you went back and did his birthday chart for his birthplace, his personal life, that's where it was showing things about the affair that he was having and things about his personal life. So it might be possible to actually calculate and work with more than one solar return chart. And this is a technique that dates back millennia, because if you think about it, computers are a very recent development in the history of astrologers and their computations. So it was very difficult to do exact charts for all different kinds of things quickly, especially if you weren't working with a computer. So if you are just trying to get a feel for what signs are the planets in at this birthday, how do the planets, configure with one another in a nicer, kind of frictionless ways, then you can just do that by looking at simply a table of the planets' positions every day, which is a book called an ephemeris. And I don't know if they even had these in the ancient days, but ancient astrologers would have known where the planets were on any given day. But if you really want to learn some astrology, an ephemeris is a great tool to have on your bookshelf. It's very boring. It's just tables of the planetary motions day after day. I can look at it and get excited. I've been reading those like on a bus, and people look over my shoulder and what is she looking at? It's just a bunch of numbers. But when you know what they mean, it's important. And I always recommend, if you want to get one, the company that does the best ephemeris is ACS. It stands for Astro Computing Services. They're now part of Starcraft's Publishing in New Hampshire. You can find them online at astrocom.com. That's right, there's 2 coms in there, astrocom.com, and look for ephemeris. So when we are doing a solar return chart, one of the main things we're looking for is how do the planets at the birthday stimulate the birth chart in the first place. Some people will read it as a standalone chart, which I have been known to do, and as I researched this a little bit online, I found some astrologers say, oh no, you're never supposed to look at it just by itself. It's only to be compared to the birth chart. I don't know. I've broken rules about things since tarot and astrology since the day I started. They say, don't let anybody touch your cards. It's like, here, clients, shuffle them up, pick them out. I've not been fussy about that. Okay, so another thing that can affect how you calculate a solar return chart, and if you're going to an astrologer and going to get a birthday reading, you might ask them which way they do their chart. This is something we've talked about before on Looking Up, called the precession of the equinoxes. Well, equinox is spring or fall. Precession means to precede. And what it means is that each year the spring equinox happens infinitesimally earlier than the year before, or let's say at an infinitesimally earlier degree of the zodiac, because actually what's happening is our whole solar system is gravitating. But, well, no, this is more related to the Earth is like a top. It has an axis, a plane of axis, and it wobbles. You know how a top wobbles a little? It wobbles on its axis, only the wobble is really slow. So that over the course of 26,000 plus years, we have the spring equinox occurring in each of the different 12 zodiac signs in the age of this and the age of that. We call the long cycle the Great Ages, and each sign is more than 2,000 years, averaging 2160. And we say we're entering now into the age of Aquarius, coming out of the age of Pisces since before maybe the time of Christ. So it's possible to do what's called a precessed solar return, which takes into account that little bit of motion, which adds up to 1 degree in 72 years. So the older you get, the further off from comparing to your exact position at birth would be if you use this precessed solar return. And again, that's going to give you very different signs that line up with those houses. And that affects everything on how it's interpreted. So I'm a believer in the place where you're having your return, not necessarily going to someplace else trying to change your life, and the plain old, where was that zodiac when you were born? I don't do the precession, but you can, go do whatever it is you like. So, as I said, each planet periodically, predictably comes back to the place where it was at the start of a birth chart. And you can do a return for entities other than humans, a cat, your car, a company, a country. But mostly we're dealing with people. So, let's see, what did I want to say next? Let's go ahead and start looking at some of the planetary periods and what we use these returns for. So many people feel that whatever the planet is symbolizing is what we should be checking when we're looking at a return of that nature. So if you're talking about the solar return chart, the sun is really about the purpose, one's mission, what's in one's heart, because the sun rules the heart and it's the heart of the chart. It's about creativity and where you want to shine or be noticed. So those are things that a solar return chart is particularly good at telling you about. Now, just as we have the once a year that the sun goes around the zodiac from our standpoint, we see the moon go around the zodiac from our standpoint in about 27 days. The actual new moon cycle is 29 and a half, but that's because the sun moved and then the moon has to catch up with it, and when it passes the sun, that's a new moon. But the moon itself goes around in about 27 days, and it comes back to its position, and we call that the lunar return. So that's about a month, a little less than a month. But the moon has to do with emotions, habits, family matters, real estate matters. It can be particularly useful for those types of questions or examinations with astrology. I oftentimes use the lunar chart just to get what I call a monthly snapshot. If someone's asked me to help them select a good date for a wedding, or a good date for elective surgery, or even scheduled surgery, but you have to get an appointment a certain day, I'll sometimes look and see, okay, which of the several months looks best for this person from those lunar return charts, even if it's not a real estate matter or an emotional matter. Okay, so we come to Mercury. As I mentioned, it has an 88-day orbit quickly around the sun. And in one Earth year, it goes around the zodiac about 3 times from our standpoint, 3.5 maybe. And we see that retrograde when Mercury passes between Earth and the sun. It lasts for about 3 weeks at a time. We have about 3 a year. So the Mercury return generally is about a year, but sometimes it might be, 11 months, 13 months. It's going to happen not too far from your birthday because your Mercury can't be too far from the sun. It's never more than about 28 degrees ahead of or behind the sun. So when it returns, it can't be too far off from your birthday. And Mercury, of course, is the planet about learning. So if you were going to say, trying to figure out when to start maybe a course of study online that you can pace at your own rate, you might want to do a Mercury return chart and see if this year you're in a good Mercury return for that study, or if you want to wait until after your next Mercury return, maybe that chart is better for your study. And of course, it has to do with communication matters, and that even involves contracts, signing contracts, preparing documents, making presentations if you had to give a really important speech or something. And it's the planet of local travel, not get in a plane and go off far travel. And it has to do with community affairs and your involvement in your local area. So I like to look at a whole year's worth of Mercury returns. I'll look at, I look for 90, not a whole year's worth, a whole lifetime's worth. I set the program to calculate for 99 years. I don't know how long anybody's going to live, but that usually covers it in most cases. And then I go looking to see in what years have you had a Mercury return that came around during its retrograde cycle. And you really get a triple Mercury return. And each return has a period of efficacy or effectiveness from that return to the next time that planet returns. So if you have a triple return because of retrograde, you're going to have the first Mercury return chart is only in effect for a few weeks, maybe even a week and a half, 10 days. The second one, same thing. It's only in effect to the next one. The third one's going to be in effect till almost a year or so later, till the next round comes in. And I have seen sometimes 2 years in a row where you get the triple Mercury returns. And we've talked plenty about Mercury return, but everybody has the bad reputation for, oh, it mixes up communications and traffic snarls and car problems. Yes, but it's also very good for going back to things that you had started and left in progress and never finished, or cleaning up that, pile of paperwork and things like that. So if you have that triple Mercury return, you might find that you're really revisiting old issues or having the same discussion with somebody that you've had before and before. Now, a Venus return, similar to Mercury, because it's between Earth and the Sun, it can't get more than 2 signs ahead of the sun sign or 2 signs behind, so it's not going to be too far off from about once a year, but it varies in the range of 10 to 14 months for you to have a Venus return. And Venus is the planet, of course, of marriage, partnerships, teamwork, relationships of all forms, cooperation, contracts, again, and representatives, people who stand in on your behalf, like your lawyer might. Okay, or even a guardian, I suppose, if you're a kid. So Venus returns, I will like to look at those, especially when I'm trying to help somebody with selecting their wedding date. But it's kind of tricky. 2 people are going to get married. So you have one partner's chart, another partner's chart, and there's actually a third chart, which is the entity between the 2 of them, called a composite chart, which is done by, halfway between person A's sun and person B's sun is the composite sun. Halfway between the moon and the moon, the composite moon, etc. So I can actually then look to see what is the Venus of the combo chart. When is it having a return? Is a certain year better for that marriage because of this Venus return, or is the next one coming up better? We're going to wait till that one. Sometimes people are flexible and they'll plan their wedding, years out in advance because they want to go get that venue they want or whatever. So try looking at the Venus return if it's for wedding selections, or even for forming a business partnership, things like that. The Mars return is approximately 2 years, not exactly, but roughly. And I can say it's pretty much not exactly, because I know in a couple instances, when you're at age 15 and again at age 47, you have a Mars return very close to your birthday solar return. So, Mars has to do with physical activities, sports, your stamina, anything you take the initiative on and you start, beginnings, and also God of war, there's conflicts involved. So, for instance, maybe if you were going to decide, are you going to run a marathon this year? Maybe you want to look at your Mars return chart. Okay, so when we get that, Mars is the first planet out past the Sun, and it still has a fairly quick return cycle. And with the Venus and the Mars returns, like I did with Mercury, I like to run a 99-year glance and see when do we have a triple Venus return, or when do we have a triple Mars return. You might never in your whole life, but if you do, that's an important time frame. Now, Venus tends to have only certain signs that it can go retrograde in, and those shift slightly over time, and they kind of go backwards through the zodiac themselves. But if you get one triple Venus return due to retrogradation, very possible you're going to have multiples of that, and they will be 8 years apart. That's part of how the Venus-Earth-Sun cycle works. Now, when we get to the further out planets, Jupiter, it has a return of about 12 years, and it's the planet of expansion, progress, growth, luck, travel. I'm not sure that I use this a lot for individuals. When we're in the longer cycled planets, it's much more helpful to look at this for non-human entities. So say a university came to me and they were looking at their development and progress over time, and they were talking about expanding and building new buildings and things like that. That would be an excellent use for looking at a Jupiter return. And when we're in the slower planets, a lot of times we will look at the phases, like When is a quarter of the Jupiter cycle expired after about 3 years, or half about 6 years through, or 3/4 about 9 years through? And those are things we don't necessarily do a chart for, but we're just kind of checking timing for that connection of a moving planet back to its birth position. That's frequently done with Saturn. Saturn has about a 29.5-year cycle, and we're oftentimes looking at that every 7 to 8 years. Something important is coming up with the quarters. That's the planet of achievement, reputation, career, responsibilities, also business and organizations. So I would say that might be good to look at governmental affairs or corporate affairs. And I don't know anybody who actually does return charts for everything out after Saturn. Chiron has an almost 51-year cycle. It's a planet of healing up of our weak links, innovation, repairs. You'd look at this for the phases, but not so much a return chart. Uranus's return, now some older astrologers are excited about this. It's after 84 years. When I was recently at a conference of international conference of astrologers in Chicago in May of 2018. They issued these big purple banners to a few astrologers who were having their Uranus return. They were turning 84 that year. And West Hartford's Alfie Lavoie was one of those. And this is the planet of individuation, our unique imprint, doing things our own way. And when people get that old, I mean that advanced in age, we should let them do whatever they want. Now, Neptune has a 165-year cycle. It has to do with beliefs as well as delusions, ideals, vision, and religion. So maybe there's something with the return of, the founding of, I don't know, a church or something like that. It might be interesting to look at the Neptune return chart. And you certainly would not look at a Pluto return chart for anything but something that lasts a long time, because that's about 249 years. And Pluto's the planet of economics, shared values, evolution, destruction as well. And the USA is coming up on our Pluto return not too long from now, because we're 242 years old since the revolution, and about, 76 to 89, 13 years less for the ratification of our Constitution. So it'll be interesting to watch what kind of developments or destruction we go through over the next couple of decades. And that is about where we start to come to our conclusion of today's discussion. If I was to summarize, I would want you to know planets have a period, they come around, they come full circle, and it tells us something about where we're coming in the circles within circles and cycles within cycles of our own development. So for your next birthday, get a solar return chart and come back and see us again soon on Looking Up.